I find that I'm a person who can take on the guises of different people that I meet. I can switch accents in seconds of meeting somebody, and I can adopt their accent. I've always found that I collect. I'm a collector. And I've always just seemed to collect personalities, ideas. I have a hodgepodge philosophy, which really is very minimal.
This is ground control to Major Tom. You've really made the grade. And the papers want to know whose shirts you wear. Now it's time to leave the capsule if you dare. This is Major Tom to ground control. I'm stepping through the door, and I'm floating in a most peculiar way. And the stars look very different today. Ground control to Major Tom, your circuit's dead, there's something wrong. Can you hear me, Major Tom? Can you hear me, Major Tom? Can you hear me, Major Tom? Can you hear, am I floating around my tin can? Far above the moon. Planet Earth is blue, and there's nothing I can do.
It's a very sad rendition, of course, because it's so tied up with his own life and death. So it takes on all these different shades for me. Because I also remember fairly clearly my state of mind when I was actually writing it, which was, I guess, some as near to a mystical state that a 19-year-old can get into. And I remember it was at a time when I was sort of studying Buddhism, for my 15 minutes of Buddhism. So it's interesting that it changed. It really had two mystical states: the time that I wrote it and recorded it, and the time when he wrote it. When he wrote it again, when he recorded it, and the things that led up to his end after that. So I guess it still retains for me a sense of the mystical.
And you play that song?
Yeah, yeah. Again, we do yet another very different version. It's kind of trance-like still. Well, it always was trance-like, but I think I'd probably push that even further.
We spoke of what and when, although I was not there. He said I was his friend, which came as some surprise. I'd spoken to his eyes, I thought you died alone, a long, long time ago. Lost control. Your vice to vice with the man who sold the world. I loved and shook his hand, made my way back home.
awfully... I know there were musicians on the album that I hadn't really worked with before, so I felt a little bit insecure about whether it was going to come out sounding the way I wanted it to. That's the only thing I remember. But it turned out okay, didn't it? Was it Wakeman on piano?
One funny thing is that the song wasn't released as a single until summer 1973. And by then
right?
you had released both Ziggy Stardust and Aladdin Sane. So, how
You
come?
know better than me. I don't know.
No? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Was it really?
Yeah.
Did it do anything?
Vi har här.
I thought Mick Rock had some really quite radical ideas, you know, and I love the way he filmed that. It was so bizarre. I'd had no idea he was going to do that. He was going to burn everything out like that, and it was just remarkable. I mean, it's a strange piece of film, but it's quite beautiful in its own way. I think that really that my subject matter hasn't really changed over the years. That I'm still in a way writing Life on Mars all these years later. You know, it hasn't. And The Man Who Sold the World. I mean, the way that I present songs has changed a lot, and the style for each album has changed considerably. I'll often try new rhythms and new kinds of arrangements. It's like I want to keep writing about the same subject, but my approach, it's like I'm trying to get into it, like finding a different door each time I approach that same subject.
And it's about alienation then?
A lot of it is, yeah, one's interior kind of isolation as well, you know. It doesn't just mean one's social isolation, it can mean, you know, how you get in contact with your own feelings, you know, as well. It can be quite personal in that way.
To the girl with the mousy hair, and her mommy is yelling no, and her father has told her to go, but her friend is nowhere to be seen as she walks through a sunken dream to the seat with the clearest view, and she's hooked to the silver screen, but the film is a saddening bore, 'cause she's lived it 10 times or more. It's about to be lived again, as they ask her to focus on sailors fighting in the dance hall. Oh man, look at those cavemen go. It's the freakiest show. Take a look at the man beating up the wrong guy. Oh man, wonder if he'll ever know. He's in the best-selling show. Is there life on Son America's tortured brown, Mickey Mouse has grown up a cow, and the workers have struck for fine, 'cause Lennon's on sale again. See the mice in their million hordes, from Ibiza to the Norfolk Broads. Rule Britannia is out of bounds, to my mother, my dog and clowns. But the film is a saddening bore, 'cause I wrote it 10 times or more. It's about to be writ again, as they ask me to focus on sailors fighting in the dance old. Oh man, look at those cavemen go. It's a freak of your soul. Take a look at the man beating up the wrong guy. Oh man, wonder if he'll ever know. He's in this best-selling show. Is there life on Mars?
That a period there was a lot of people who really tried to put David Bowie in the Ziggy years in with the Alice Cooper thing because of
isn't that absurd?
Well, it was because of
I think it was inevitable. I don't know. It's not absurd. I
Well,
mean,
it's a
both
pretty
were doing
broad category.
well,
but
you
people
know,
tend to
too,
do things like that. don't
Yes, they do have a tendency.
I kind of expected all that to happen, and I just trusted in my own conceptions that eventually we'd split off and have separate identities, Alice and myself.
Worked out okay.
Yeah, I mean, just trusted in my own optimistic ideas of what I could do.
Are you these days that optimist as well? Do you see that much optimism in rock and roll? That was a very optimistic record for rock. I mean,
Yeah.
this guy's
Well,
saving rock, literally.
I'm pretty self-satisfied with my own individuality. I don't think I have to exert myself so much to explain that I'm not part of rock and roll. I have my own identity. I just use rock and roll, and I had to be very exaggerated in the beginning to defy people to put me into a category so that would leave me room to work in. Ziggy, I wanted to define the archetype Messiah rock star. That's all I wanted to do, and I used the trappings of kabuki theater, mime technique, fringe New York music, like my references were Velvet Underground,
Right.
whatever.
Suffragette City or
It had that
The Street,
energy
you had
value.
The
I wanted
Street.
that energy value. Yeah, it was a
Even the cover
British
was
view of American street energy. So Ziggy was for me a very simplistic thing. It was what it seemed to be, an alien rock star, and for performance value, I dressed him and acted him out. I left it at that, but other people reread him and contributed more information about Ziggy than I had put into him.
Right, they could write novels about that guy.
Right, I think basically because of the that I'd put 3 viewpoints into the album from 3 different areas. Maybe the character himself would appear, and then there would be 2 other statements by 2 other people, all on one album, which was kind of confusing.
Oh,
But
very
it was, I mean, it
theatrical,
was the way an author would write a book.
Yes.
Rather, I mean, it hadn't been utilized that much in records. And I
Forever.
had
And
trouble
they-
explaining
they
that it was
stayed
just,
spiders,
it was a
didn't they?
theater piece, that the spiders didn't really exist, that they only existed for the length, the duration of that character's life.
Right.
I was stuck with him for a long time. It took a long time to shake him off after I'd finished working with him, because people relate to him more than David Bowie at the time. It was still very hard for anybody to realize that a rock artist can go on stage and be a different
People
person
still-
every time he goes on stage.
Now Ziggy played guitar, jamming good with weird Guinness. Spiders were fun when he played it left hand, but he made it too far. Became a special man. Then we were Ziggy's band. Ziggy really sang, screwed up eyes and screwed down head. Ooh, that's how I put the hand on became I'm so lonely, man. I dance like hell. The wind was flying us, while the fight tried to break our bones. Does the beer like to guide us? So it's the bow of Miss Rams and should we get to sweet hands? Oh yeah! Ziggy played for time, driving us up. We were voodoo. The kids with his class. He was finance with God-given ass, but he took it all too far. But boy, could he play guitar. Lighting up with his ego. Oh, yeah. She can suck up into his mind. Like a leopard messiah. When the kids had killed the man, I had to break up the band. Oh yeah! Now Ziggy played guitar.
Oh, you know something? I think it's as corny as Search for a Spiritual Foundation. I really do think it's as kind of cliche as that.
That's an easy answer.
Yes, I know, and unfortunately I keep coming back to it, you know. I suppose it's that, is a term that the Gnostics use, which is called the God beyond God. And I think that there's a sense of one's trying to find some merit in the chaos that we perceive as our existence. And for someone like myself who comes from, like most of us, I don't know, in this room, come from the Judeo-Christian upbringing, there's something that palls with the idea of having a God who's a judge and a father and an arbiter of morals and whatever. It just doesn't, it seems too symbolic, it's too easy. And I think that the idea that the early Gnostics had, which is that there is in fact the deep, the depth of the God beyond the God. There's something beyond that which one can't call a singular entity. It's something that just pervades everything. And I still think that that's probably one of the major searches that I've probably made in my life. I'm not sure how close I ever got, but I know that it does occur to most of us, I think, who work in the arts or in writing or expressing oneself. When you're expressing oneself, you're also trying to express one's existence, you know, so it's wrapped up in the same thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't know. It's something to do with that. It's something to do with what used to be feelings of alienation, although those feelings have kind of dissipated over the last 10 years for me. I don't feel as though I'm picked on by today. I feel as though I feel comfortable in my society.
Collaborate with John Lennon. Yeah, how did that come about?
Gee, you know, it's really hard to remember when I actually met John. It must have been sort of somewhere middle 74-ish is my guess. I expect there's a book that can tell me. But we kind of started knocking around with each other. And he had his, I think at the time, gave me, which I thought one of the better Lennon quotes, which I've said a number of times. But when I asked him what he thought of what I was doing, glam rock, he said, yeah, it's great, but it's just rock and roll with lipstick on. And I was impressed as I was at virtually everything he said. He was probably one of the brightest, quickest-witted, earnestly socialist men I've ever met in my life. Socialist in true definition, not in a fabricated political sense, but a real humanist, and a really spiteful sense of humour, which of course, being English, I adored. I just thought we'd be buddies forever and get on better and better and all that, you know. Fantasy. I know the Beatle that I always liked. Because everybody had their favourite Beatle. I never really realised that. Well, I did realise that, always knew that. But one wouldn't have declared it in the early 70s because that would have been most uncool to actually say that you actually liked the Beatles in any way, shape or form. But they made such a great impact on. They gave the British the illusion that they meant something again. You know, and we love hearing that. Oh boy, do we love hearing that.
What about collaborating with John Lennon? How did that come about?
Gee, you know, it's really hard to remember when I actually met John. It must have been sort of somewhere middle 74-ish is my guess. I expect there's a book that can tell me. But we kind of started knocking around with each other. And he had his, I think at the time, gave me, which I thought one of the better Lennon quotes, which I've said a number of times. But when I asked him what he thought of what I was doing, glam rock, he said, yeah, it's great, but it's just rock and roll with lipstick on. And I was impressed as I was at virtually everything he said. He was probably one of the brightest, quickest-witted, earnestly socialist men I've ever met in my life. Socialist in true definition, not in a fabricated political sense, but a real humanist, and a really spiteful sense of humour, which of course, being English, I adored. I just thought we'd be buddies forever and get on better and better and all that, you know. Fantasy. I know the Beatle that I always liked. Because everybody had their favourite Beatle. I never really realised that. Well, I did realise that, always knew that. But one wouldn't have declared it in the early 70s because that would have been most uncool to actually say that you actually liked the Beatles in any way, shape or form. But they made such a great impact on. They gave the British the illusion that they meant something again. You know, and we love hearing that. Oh boy. big fan of Iggy's for a number of years. I'd never ever seen him perform, ever.
You didn't know about the razor blades and the glass and the peanut butter?
Well, I heard, you know, I knew all that stuff.
Rumors, vicious rumors.
Well, knowing Jim,
Yeah.
it was incongruous, but actually going out on tour with him was the first time I'd ever seen him work. That was quite a surprise.
He's amazing.
Yes, he is.
That must have been amazing for you, though, to sit back there every night behind a piano in front of people. And I mean, you lent your name to the project. There's.
But we knew that we'd have that problem from the beginning, and we knew we'd gradually back off.
How did it feel
Jimmy
being a
felt
session
more
man?
assertive about what he was
How
doing.
did it feel being a session man? As Ray Davies
Fantastic.
says, not paid the
Fantastic. I had
thing.
my bottle of beer and a packet of cigarettes and a piano, and I could get drunk with the band. And
I remember you wearing those thick glasses and your little Harvard law school glasses, and you were really.
I adored it.
It was a terrific
Quite the
character.
Ivy League image,
I really
yeah.
adored it.
In both Low and Heroes, you create moods that are thought paintings that don't really require words or can get along with a mock language and not even a real tongue to get the
Absolutely.
idea across.
Yeah.
Is that what's coming? Is that what's up now?
Well,
More
what
than-
happened is that I didn't have the necessary verbal equipment to describe what I was seeing, and that's where I needed assistance.
Mm-hmm.
I needed somebody to bounce ideas off and somebody to give me input, because
Right.
I was so confused with all these blessed people running around my head that I had to do that. So, and Eno was somebody that I'd known for years and years and never had the chance to work with.
Brian Eno, formerly of Roxy Music, for any of you people who don't know. I'm sorry.
And formerly of the Portsmouth Symphonia.
Portsmouth
bless
Symphony.
And many lectures.
Many lectures, all that. He's a
Professor of Fine Arts.
right. And you got involved with him. And he
Yeah.
had been making electronic music for, you know.
I wouldn't like to just call it electronic music. He'd been making his own very personal music for because he also used organic instruments as well, apart from electronics.
Hey, even Heroes, where side
Yeah.
one is so accessible that it's the finest, I think in our opinion, what you've done up to date as far as bridging that, accessibility towards that, as you would say, personal music,
Yeah, there was a lot of enthusiasm on Heroes because Brian and I liked so much what we did on Low, and we knew we had it in us to do another one, and now I think even a third one.
I wish I could swim like dolphins can swim. Though nothing can drive them away, we can beat them just for one day. Just for one day. What you say? Such is the stuff from where dreams are over. Bending sound, lost in my struggle, dredging the ocean. Here am I, flashing no color, tall in my room, overlooking ocean. Here are we, one magical movement from Canada to London. Throwing darts in lovers' eyes. The return of the thin white tube. Throwing darts in lovers' eyes. The return of the thin white tube. Making sure white slaves. Once there were mountains and mountains. Once there was that's the story that once I could never be down. I bet you keep searching and searching. No one will believe me, and you will not let me go. Wonderland, how you so fortunate to fortune to shine. Welcome to the land who protect you and I.
Yes, I think it's an analogy more than anything else. Nick Rogue believes in using the area of science fiction to portray inner space rather than outer space, but they use the equipment and the utensils of outer space. Well, because no time was allowed to show any emotion, and I'd learned to speak by watching television, and so everything was very stunted, and I used to end up in the day with a face that hurt because I couldn't move any muscles.
How did this collaboration come about?
Again, that was through Dave Richards, the engineer at the studio. I was in town in Montreux doing some other work there. And because I believe that Queen have something to do with the studio on the business level. I think it's their studio or something like that. And they were recording there, and David knew that I was in town and phoned me up and asked me if I'd come down and if I'd like to go down and see what was happening. So I went down. And these things happen, you know, suddenly you're writing something together, and it was totally spontaneous. I mean, it certainly wasn't planned. It was peculiar.
We just went into the studio, did the song, and out it came. It was no big...
No, but I mean, wasn't there this whole drama about him taking his name off of it or wanting to not be...
No, that was something else. He did sort of like backing vocals on one of my songs that was on the album then. That's not Under Pressure, that's another one.
Right.
And when it came to being released, I mean, he didn't like what he did. That was like, you know, asshole tells me right at the tail end when the thing is just about to come out. So anyway, that's you know, artistic license. He just didn't like his voice right when it was about to come out. And I said, fine. I said, it's quite easy. All I do is erase his vocal, and out it came. It wasn't like he didn't do a very in-depth vocal at all. It was just a background. It was just background vocals. So I mean, he just didn't.
Do you think it was petty? I mean, do you think it was unnecessary?
Whatever. I think it was unnecessary, but I mean...
Are you not speaking to each other?
Always speaking. It's just that we're in different parts of the world, and... No, I'm not one of those bitchy queens that you like to... No. It's just... No, he's all right. He's okay.
How did you happen to work with him in the first place?
Well, I mean, we were friends from a long time back, and we were in Montreux in Switzerland. We own a studio there, so we were working on it, and he lives there. He just happened to be there, and he kept coming to the studio, listening to our tracks, and we were jamming to some of his old songs and things. And then one day one night we were having dinner, and after that we were going back into the studio to carry on with the session. And it just happened. He just said, oh, why don't we just fool around and get something started and see what happens? And, you know, we started playing on the piano, and the rest of the band were there, and we started putting something down, and Under Pressure started to go.
recording of Under Pressure is, I guess, there's 3 C's, coincidence, creativity and compromise. The coincidence being that Bowie and Queen were all at Montreux in Switzerland at the same time. The creativity came out of them jamming together, and more importantly, fueled by cocaine and red wine, Mercury and Bowie separately went into the vocal booth with no real rehearsals, and dropped whatever idea came to their head at lib in an avant-garde way based on Deacon's bass line. Compromise is that when you have so many egos, to get such a fantastic mix, arrangement, and balance and EQ is outstanding.
In '76, and I had never seen anybody in my life work as hard as that guy did. I mean, he was getting up at 8 in the morning to travel by car. He didn't fly, so by car all day to gig. In the car would always be a fresh collection of the newest tapes by artists from all over the world, studying the stuff, listening to it. So, okay, Tom Waits, he knew about Tom Waits before anybody. Kraftwerk, he knew about Kraftwerk before anybody. So not just, oh, I'm into this kind of music, man, and that's all I like. He gets to the town, does a couple of interviews, catches a half-hour sleep, and he's on stage doing the show. Then after the show, the guy won't stop. He's out checking out whatever band is in town, knocking on his guitarist's door at 4 in the morning, let's write a new song. I was exhausted just watching it.
Iggy Pop and I were a couple of very naughty boys who went to Berlin to learn how to be good. Or was I watching the Travel Channel? Can't remember. Oh, it's so 20th century when a commercial gets a round of applause. Well, I remember one morning after a particularly mischievous night out, we both met up at a coffee bar that we used to frequent and discussed the doings of the night before. And Iggy, or Jim, related most extraordinary events. He said that he'd been to a punk club. It was the anniversary of the building of the wall, that you must remember. And he went to a punk club that were holding an anniversary party. And they built an entirely accurate replica of the Berlin Wall. And at the stroke of midnight, 50 savage, demented punks leapt on this wall and tore it to pieces with their mouths and teeth and fists. Smash, smash. But he said it was the aftermath that was the most affecting, because there were, after all this had happened, they demolished the wall, there were small groups of them standing around in the corners, pitifully crying, tears streaming down their faces. I thought that was an incredibly moving thing, and a real memory of Berlin, the Berlin that I knew at the time anyway. This is a song that I wrote with Jim at around that time, and I guess this one is also sort of about invasion and exploitation. Take it away, Mike.
Escape this feeling with my child girl. I'm just a wreck without my little child girl. I hear her heart beating, it's loud as thunder. without my little China girl. Wake up in the morning, where's my little China girl? I hear her heart beating, and it's loud as thunder. My soul starts crashing down. I feel tragic like Marlon Brando when I look at my China girl. I could pretend nothing really meant too much when I look at my China girl. I stumble into town just like some sacred cow. Visions of swastikas in my head, plans for everyone. It's in the words. My little China girl, you shouldn't mess with me. I'll ruin everything that you are. Sure, I'll give you television, I'll give you eyes of blue, I'll give you a man who once never ruled the world. And when I get excited, my little China girl, she said, oh baby, just you shut your mouth. She said, she said,
time of the flood, they all went into the ark. All of the animals, by agreement. It's the only time the creatures of this world have ever agreed about anything. They really all did come. But the ichthyosaurus didn't. Everybody said he should get on board, but he was very busy just then. Noah himself warned him that the flood was coming, but he quietly said, I don't believe it. He was universally unpopular when he drowned. Ah, yes, they all said the ichthyosaurus won't be coming. He was the oldest beast of them all, well qualified by his great experience to say whether such a thing as a flood was or was not feasible. It's very possible that if a similar situation ever arises, I shan't get on board either. Whilst his mother's womb contained the growing bough, even then the sky was waiting quiet and pale, naked, young, immensely marvelous, like Baal loved it when he came to us. That same sky remained with him in joy and care, even when Baal slept, peaceful and unaware. At night a lilac sky, a drunken bough, turning pious as the sky grows pale.